Well, now you've gone and done it. You've found my podcast. My name is Dave Sundstrom, and I talk about music, movies, and television, mostly from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, the good stuff. This podcast is actually an audio companion to my YouTube channel, and I would love it if you would join me over there and participate in the robust conversations that can be found in the comments section of each of my videos. That said, you're not over there right now. You are here, hanging out with me, listening to my podcast. So after a very brief sponsorship message, let's get going. Today's episode of the podcast aims to definitively answer once and for all, who was the funniest character on the Andy Griffith Show? Over the course of the next few minutes, I will count down the top 5 characters. Now, I must admit there is a bit of subjectivity with this list due to the fact that I had to identify 5 characters, and then I allowed visitors to my YouTube channel to pick which one of these 5 Maybarians, can I call them that, was actually the funniest. The 5 characters that I included in my online poll are lawman extraordinaire Barney Fife, the world's greatest rock thrower Ernest T. Bass, Floyd the Barber, future Marine Gomer Pyle, and Otis the Town Drunk. Initially, I had left Otis off the list, but there were so many comments about his exclusion, I decided to restart the online poll and include him in it. With that said, I do feel it's important in this day and age to stress that alcoholism is a real disease and there is nothing funny about it. Okay, with my public disclaimer out of the way, I thought before I shared the results with everyone that I might share a few of the comments that were submitted by some of the folks that participated in the survey. Some of them are real good. Let's start with Rock Bay 79. He said, the Andy Griffith Show was like a big puzzle. It needed all the pieces, in parentheses actors, to be such a great show. You can see its downfall as the characters slowly left. I hated when Gomer left, but we gained Gomer Pyle USMC. However, when Barney left the show and went to color, it lost its magic. Also, from Richard Bittinger, he said, as I said before, Don Knotts was a living cartoon character, just like Ernest T. Bass. There was a lot of physical comedy that went into Barney's character that nobody else could have done, at least like him. The others were funny, but none of them had enough screen time to beat Barney. Looking back, all of the actors on that show were fantastic because all of them made their respective characters seem so believable. Chad Baxter said, just sitting here in my car on my lunch break with the AC cranked up high and reading this survey takes me back to that place where Barney and Andy would be sitting in the patrol car saying hi to the citizens that walked by. Love it. David Conley pointed out, quick fact about the Town Drunk Otis. He was the only one on the show that in real life didn't drink. Last Guy Min said, Don Knotts was an American treasure. Not even the death throes of Three's Company could tarnish his star. Wait. Come on, Last Guy Min. Really? I loved him in Three's Company. Ralph Furley? Maybe not quite as funny as Barney Fife, but darn close. Larry Fisher, really, how could you pick just one? They're all so darn funny. Craig Mack, Floyd, people, Floyd. Sublime humor every time. Craig Schleetweiler said, best show ever with all the characters as a whole like a giant comedy puzzle. Never again will we be entertained like this. It's a classic that still stands up today. Jeff Liss said, Otis was funny, but he was a one-joke pony. Barney was funny in so many ways, including comments, philosophy, and physical comedy. David Schmarter said, growing up, Otis was my role model. Okay, Dave. Jeff Kennedy, if Ernest had been on more, I would say him, but wasn't so I have to give it to Barney. Maria Cisneros Toth said, when my dad was in his 80s, I always knew when he had just watched a rerun of the Andy Griffith Show because he would start laughing and say, oh, that Barney. Gene Snodgrass said, this is hard for me. Barney was the most consistently funny cast member, but Ernest T. was hilarious when he was a guest. And lastly, let's end with Johnny G, who said, I think we all just love Barney. When Barney left the show, it just wasn't the same. But Ernest T., when he and Barney were together or not, I think he may have stole those episodes. Oh wait, one more. Floyd was greatness personified. Thank you, Mark Maricini. I agree, he was. So, there you go. I think, based on the comments alone, you might be getting a good idea which character was actually the runaway favorite funny person on the show. But let's start with number 5. Coming in with 4% of the votes was good old Gomer Pyle. You know, I guess that makes sense. Gomer, as played by Jim Nabors, was more friendly than funny. You kind of got the feeling that's the way that Nabors was in real life as well. On my YouTube channel, I've produced a couple of videos about Nabors, and one in particular about his loyalty to his co-star Frank Sutton is one of my channel's most watched videos. If you haven't seen it, just Google Jim Nabors with the word loyalty, and it should be near the top of the search results. At least it is for me. Number 4 is a bit of a surprise for me. With only 5% of the votes, Floyd the Barber locks down the 4th position. I guess some folks think that Floyd is more weird than funny. Personally, I think Floyd, as played by the late great Howard McNear, is a hoot. Howard is also an inspiration to me due to the challenges that he overcame to continue to be part of the show after suffering an incredibly debilitating stroke. It would take him almost a year and a half to recover, and when he did return to the show, you will notice that most, if not all, of his scenes had him sitting, and movement was kept to a minimum. Moving on to number 3. Here he is, folks. Mr. Otis Campbell. You know I read that comment earlier about Hal Smith not drinking. Well, that's absolutely true. He was adamantly against the consumption of alcoholic beverages. Still, I've got to admit that Hal was very funny and incredibly likable as Otis. And I do applaud his decision, when asked to return for the Andy Griffith reunion movie, to demand that Otis be clean and sober. If I remember correctly, in that movie, Otis had become the town's ice cream man. Okay, so we're now down to just 2 guys, Ernest T. Bass and Barney Fife. Who do you think is going to be Mayberry's funniest character? Go ahead, say it out loud right now. I'll wait. Okay, if you said Barney Fife, ding ding ding, well, you were able to correctly guess what 66% of those that participated in the poll said as well. Nicely done. So that means that Ernest T. Bass lands firmly in the number 2 slot with 15% of the votes. By the way, I should mention that almost 3,000 people participated in the poll, so the data sample is fairly robust. Anyway, getting back to Ernest, that's pretty darn impressive given that I believe the character only showed up 6 times during the show's 8-season run. The man who played Ernest, Howard Morris, was actually one of the show's go-to directors, and he was pretty darn vocal about the fact that he felt Ernest was better and much funnier in limited doses. And he was right. Despite those limited appearances, it's hard to imagine the Andy Griffith Show without Ernest T. Bass wandering the hills, the outskirts of Mayberry, just slightly off screen, but always ready to pounce and perhaps throw a rock or two through the courthouse windows. And I've got to believe that Ernest T. Bass was at least slightly part of the inspiration behind Jim Varney's Ernest character that became such a pop culture phenomenon during the 80s and 90s. There are just too many similarities. Okay, so now we're at number 1. Yep, Barney Fife. What's 66% of 2,900 and something? Let's just say over 1,900 votes. He is hands down, without argument, the funniest character on the show. And you know what? You've got to hand it to Don Knotts and Andy Griffith for realizing early on that Barney Fife was going to be the funny one on the show, not Andy, as had been originally intended. Barney's impact on the show was so great that some folks don't even bother watching the episodes after the 5th season, which was his last one when he was a regular on the show. And pity the poor guy who had to follow in Barney's footsteps. Deputy Warren Ferguson, as played by the very funny and talented Jack Burns, lasted just a handful of episodes before everyone realized that you couldn't replace Barney Fife. It simply could not be done. So there you go. That's it. Again, repeating the rankings, we've got Gomer at 5, Floyd in the 4th spot, Otis knocking down number 3, Ernest T. sporting the deuce, and Barney at number 1. I hope you enjoyed this countdown, and I'd encourage you to jump on over to my YouTube channel to check out many of the conversations that continue on regarding one of the greatest television shows of all time, The Andy Griffith Show. Alright, that's it, folks. Again, this podcast is a complement to the videos that I make over on YouTube. I'd love to have you swing on by my channel. It's easy to find because my channel is my name, Dave Sundstrom. So anyway, thank you for taking a few moments out of your day to get a little nostalgic with me. I really appreciate it. I truly do.